Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Barbara Tien, and absolutely delighted to welcome you to a very special program today for Project Kin. We have as our guest none other than Paul Chiddicks, whom I've known now for, I guess, a few years, as many of you have, through his voice on Twitter and then Blue Sky, actively engaging in the community and sharing with us some incredible stories in his ongoing WordPress publication, Chiddicks Family Tree.com. And then as he moved into Substack and became such a thoughtful voice, such insight into family stories, why we're telling our stories and where we're going. And today I am delighted to bring Paul in to talk about one of his most well-known posts, which curiously is not about a story in his own family, but rather observations from an incredible photograph that led him on a journey. So let me turn it over to you, Paul, and have you tell us the story. Go ahead, please, Paul.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be a guest finally on one of your shows. And thank you for all those that have turned out to listen to Adelaide's story. It's nice of everyone to show up. That's very good. Let's start at the very beginning then. I began researching over 35 years ago and I had no idea where I was going and what I was going to do. And eventually, after many, many years of research, I thought, well, I've got to start documenting these stories. All I had was cold data, names, dates, places, photos, no facts, no stories. There was no detail, no flesh to the bones. So probably around 10 years ago, I started a blog. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, no idea where it was going. I just wanted to throw some words on a piece of paper and start telling a few of the stories. So that's kind of where the blogging, storytelling and all of that evolved. And then many years later, I'd written stories, generic stories. I'd written stories about family members. I'd written all 16 great-grandparents' biographies. And I guess I got to the point of the stories were kind of drying up. So there was, I always say that every voice matters and every story has to be told. But in terms of the main trunk of my tree, I was kind of, scratching around for a different angle and a different story. So I started looking for something else to write about because I just love writing, love telling stories. And so I kind of explored different avenues. Some worked, some didn't work. And then kind of out the blue, I stumbled across a picture, and I mentioned it on when Sunday we spoke, didn't we, about the Titanic picture the day after the Titanic sank. So that story really was the first, I would say, deviation from my tree, and I really enjoyed it, and it got a lot of response and people enjoyed the storytelling, and so I was kind of exploring that avenue, and then across social media, of course, certain pictures get freshly rotated around, whether you on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, and the picture of Adelaide was one of those that does the rounds, and I always refer to her, and I refer to it in the story, that I call her the poster girl of poverty for children in England, because everyone recognises the picture because it's so iconic and it's associated with the poverty and young children. And so I'd seen the picture many times, and I never really thought too much about it. So I did a Google, as you do, did a quick Google to see what came up, and there was a few potted snippets of a story, but it was just born here, died there, siblings here, siblings there. So there was no actual story behind the picture. But what I did discover was there was quite a long thread on Roots Chat, and that thread was people asking about Adelaide's story. And then I read through all the posts, and I didn't really think too much of it. And then right at the end was a guy called John Curnow. John is actually Adelaide's great nephew, and he put on there just a kind of off the chance comment about would anyone like to research Adelaide's story. And it was just really that one. If I hadn't read that message that day, none of this would have evolved and none of this would have happened. And everything that followed came from that. Now, John had done a lot of research, but he couldn't tell the story. He had a lot of the certificates and the information, but there was no flesh to the bones, if you like. And so then it began, I would say probably, if I said 2 years on and off, because you're never working on a project solely, there's always other stuff that you're doing in between time. And so really it was from there that the project began to gain legs, if you want to call it that. But boy, I had absolutely no idea where it was going to go. And even now, when I look back, I always say the story's got layers, but this story's got layers upon layers upon layers. And I think I've said before, I've written it before, if you submitted this for a book publication or a Netflix miniseries, they'd turn you down because it's too far-fetched. Because every corner that you turn, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And we're not talking about just poverty. We're talking about incestuous relationships. We're talking about imprisonment. We're talking about Jack the Ripper. There's so many different aspects all attached to Adelaide's life. And it's hard to imagine. I sometimes sit even now and try and imagine what her day was like at either end of her life, her early years, which were so difficult, or the end, what did she think about? What did she look back and reflect on? But I suppose if we go back to the beginning, the photograph itself, and I think I've said it before, although it was taken quite early in the century by a man called Horace Warner. Now, he was a Quaker minister, and what he did was he did a series of stories associated with these children. And he was doing a lot of good work at the time in East London and for the poverty-stricken children and families. And he was raising money. So he would take the pictures of the children and sell the stories. So there's lots of different children similar to in Adelaide. But looking back now and having looked at all these different pictures, it was clearly staged. And I know it was sort of in the early infancy of photography, but the picture was kind of staged for a reason, to get a reaction and obviously to raise the money. I think the caption that goes with it was Little Adelaide's best and only boots, but she couldn't bear to be seen in these boots, so the boots were taken away, and so she's barefoot and looks like a barefoot little waif. And that's really the iconic image that everyone sees, because the boots are so tattered and worn. And what Horace did actually was quite amusing. He took the picture of the boots and hung it up in the house at home as a reminder to his own daughters, Ruth and I think Gwen, so that they would always be grateful for what they had growing up. So that picture remained in Horace's sort of household for many, many years afterwards. And there really began the story of Adelaide. But you have to think about what London was like back then. It was poverty. When you hear the word poverty, it really doesn't cover what their life was like. When you say people were living hand to mouth, again, it doesn't really capture. They were scraping a living, literally scraping a living, and they never looked no further than a roof over their heads that night. That was the goal, to earn enough pennies because both her parents were costermongers. So basically they were selling wares from a street barrow. And what didn't get spent on drink was then going to buy a roof for them to sleep as a family that particular evening. And that's how their day-to-day existence was, sort of scraping for I wouldn't say a living, because it wasn't really a living. It was just about survival. And I often go back to the thought that really sticks with me is, whether you're an adult or a child, if you remove someone's hope, if you take away hope, what else have you got? You know, you may only have the clothes you've got to stand up in, and you may only have a roof, not every night of the week. But if there's no hope of breaking out of that, then what else is there? You know, hope is the thing that we all cling on to. And if that's removed, then what else is there? But you have to sort of, again, go back to before she was born. The family had lost 3 children in a month. No, I know infant mortality then was quite high. I think comparatively, the West End of London, the posh bit, where all the rich people live, even still today, I think infant mortality there was sort of twice, or it was half of the expected for the East End of London. And even life expectancy for adults, I think it was 55 if you lived in the West End, and it was something like 35, I think it was 35 to 40. It's ridiculous. So that, you know, they were barely surviving. And you go back to where they lived. It was most of the places that she lived and frequented were all in a very sort of not even a square mile, a quarter mile of Spitalfields, really. And Dorset Street was at the centre of all of these places where she lived. I think it was described once in a book as the worst street in London, and they used to refer to it as "do as you please" street. And if you look at, I did a bit of study on the Booth maps, which give you an indication of the density population and the type of population. And I think it was described there that it was full of thieves, prostitutes, all living in common lodging houses. And it was colour coded with the worst rating by Charles Booth. And I think it was described as vicious and semi-criminal. And even the police would only go round in pairs. They were not brave enough to go round. So that's the picture of her day-to-day life. Deprivation, poverty, criminality. It was all happening on the streets around her. And that was what her day-to-day life would have been like. And then when I started doing the research, when I came to Dorset Street, I immediately knew Dorset Street, but I didn't quite catch where I knew it from. But of course, when you put in Google Dorset Street, immediately it comes up Jack the Ripper. Now, Jack the Ripper's, I think it was his 5th victim. I'll have to refresh my brain on that. I'm sure it's the fifth victim. Was killed in the property next door. Not at the same time. I can't actually categorically say that Adelaide was there at that moment in time, but there was only several years apart. I can document, obviously, the recording of the Jack the Ripper death is there, cast in stone, and I've got a date also for Adelaide, but literally it is the house next door. And if you look at the blog that I wrote, you can see the alleyway, and it is just an alleyway to access the property, and it is a courtyard. Makes it sound rather nice. I mean, it is grim. It's just brick walls and grey. It's not the most attractive street and place to, certainly not the place you want to bring your children up in. But it's hard to sort of put that into perspective that, you know, if you think of all the Jack the Ripper stories that you've read and all the Jack the Ripper programs that we've all seen and cinemas and programs, just now picture a small child living in that kind of environment, which he would have done. You know, nothing changed over those years. So it's a real eye opener. It's how she survived and lived as long as she did. It staggers me. Going back to the picture, she was 8 years old when the picture was taken, but at this time as well, her mother had become an alcoholic. Father was in and out of prison, so where she was day to day, whether she was with neighbours, sort of, there's no documented sort of where she was when the father was in prison and when the mother was sort of recovering from her alcoholism. And then around the time she was about 14, sadly, her mother collapsed and died on the stairs of the property. And I think they, because of the association with the Jack the Ripper story, the press at the time described when her mother died. It was quite a detailed report, and with details that Adelaide was there on the steps. But what it also says, they called it the haunted house because of its association with the Jack the Ripper story. But going back to the hope, you know, how do you keep recovering? These are not setbacks and knockbacks. These are things that would, you know, it would finish some people. You know, how you keep continuing to get up and have the courage to I wouldn't say fight really, but to carry on going and going and going and going and going. By this time, her older brother had moved away, so she was effectively a 14-year-old girl on her own. There's a gap there between the records, but the next records show her going into service, which was natural progression, which many young girls would have done, young teenage girls. So that's not surprising. And then not soon after that, her only surviving sibling, her older brother, he dies. So she's basically lost all her connections to her family. And it really it makes you wonder where I wouldn't say where what what life decisions, what choices did she have? I don't think she was ever in a stable enough time until later on in life, much later in life, to think about a future or think about doing different things. And again, I often come back to the fact: did she ever smile? Was she ever happy? And that kind of really it pulls at me even now, you know, to know that she was so desperate, and struggling day in, day out, week in, week out. Don't get me wrong, you know, there was a lot of people that had difficult lives and difficult childhoods, but hers was one of continual struggle. Yeah. And then as an adult, she formed a relationship with a man, Frank Harling or Harding. There's no document. I can't find a record of a marriage. They may have married, but I can't find a record for that. But she assumed his name. She took on his name. And I was kind of thinking at this point, come on, let's have a break. Let's give poor Adelaide a break now. She's an adult. She's had all this life of struggle. She's met a man. So let's see if she can settle down and enjoy life, a bit of a future. But boy, she picked a wrong one there. She picked a wrong one there. And again, he was a petty criminal. Some of the offences were deeply disturbing. As an incestuous relationship with his own daughter. He'd been previously married. But But of course, I don't know whether Adelaide would have known any of this, because this was before they met. So, he was a man that kept perhaps a dark background and dark secrets. So I can't believe that she would have knowingly set up house with a guy who had a past and background like that. That's how I think, anyway. So none of this ever took place while they were together, or at least there's no record. I've not found a record that shows him being arrested for any crimes after he got with Adelaide. So perhaps she had a good influence on him. Perhaps he turned the corner. You have to sort of, you can only go with what factually you have with records. But yeah, I like to fill the space with optimism. I'm quite an optimistic person. So I think she never knew his criminal past. She never knew what he was like. She knew what he was like once they got together. And maybe he turned the corner slightly. I don't know. I have to sort of think, take something positive. But then it takes yet another twist. It's just when you think, okay, he's turned the corner, he's going to be a nice guy, and they're going to set up a life together and live happily ever after, just like they do in all these great novels. But then in 1951, on a Boxing Day, he suddenly takes his own life, commits suicide. So whether it was his past catching up with him, again, circumstance, you just don't know. He was obviously of a state of mind where he was not in a fit state of mind, and whether it was his past or certain other circumstances. But once again, she was back on her own. So it was just a cycle of losing people that she loved or cared about or loved her, and it was just a repeat cycle. But she did, after he died, she survived and lived another 35 years on her own. Well, there's no record of her being with anybody else. And she ended up in what we'd call a care home, or a kind of an institution where you were catered for and looked after. And she lived to the ripe old age of 93. But I've got this picture of her at the window. Was she longing to, looking out the window? Is she smiling? Is she happy? Did she ever think back to her past? What did she miss? What did she mourn? What did she pine for? I just want to know that in those later years, that there was some kind of peace, happiness, reconciliation with her past. I don't know. I just cling to the fact that that the last few years were the happiest. That's what I want to believe, anyway. I'll never ever know that. Yeah, it's just, I don't want to believe that the suffering went on and on and on. But sadly, like many people from that generation, she's in an unmarked grave, buried in Kensal Green Cemetery in London. But some kind lady many years ago, after I wrote the story and it first got published, she actually put some flowers on there on my behalf. I will go to the grave one day. But she actually kindly, she put some flowers in. But I go back to the thing that throughout her life, she never had enough of anything. She never had enough food. She never had enough warmth. Never had enough shelter. Never had enough love. And again, hope. It's just that hope, and knowing that the last few years, I hope that there was something in there that kind of made her last few years the best. But it's really a story of survival, endurance. It's difficult to know how you keep carrying on. When you've lost family and you've lost loved ones, and you've lost opportunities, how do you keep bouncing back and bouncing back and bouncing back? But that's testament to her courage, her resilience, and her character. Really, it's and when if you look at when she died with no known relatives. She didn't even know that she had a great nephew and a great niece. So she died alone in terms of family members because they'd lost contact over the years. So yeah, very tough. A tough story. But what happened there, once the story was written and the story was told, and it got shared and the story was going around. But the guy that does a lot of writing and tours for Jack the Ripper, and that man named Russell Edwards, he contacted me and said he'd read Adelaide's story and could he share it, which I obviously agreed, and could he do an interview? And that's really where the story sort of, I wouldn't say went viral, but it went viral in my world anyway, because I did this interview down in Shropshire, and Russell kindly promoted the story, and yeah, it's been shared and shared and shared, and every now and again it gets a spike in popularity. People come back to the story. As I say, if you go back if you take every chapter all the way through, if you wrote that as a book, it would be too far-fetched. I'm only scratching at the surface of all the infinite details of what's gone on. But yeah, people would probably think it was too extreme or too unbelievable to have happened to one person. But yeah.
You have shown us in these captures of the narrative with your exhaustive research. You have shown us the depth that can be sitting right there in plain view, in even some notoriety for the artifact itself that remains. You can show us how one person's story can represent the larger experience of her peers. And was, as you say, it was staged in terms of the original photograph for a message to be sent by Horace Walters, right?
Horace Warner.
Warner. And that was so many years ago, and the period of time in England, it was so many years ago. And yet here we are again looking at how that kind of resilience still speaks to us, and to the challenge of it's interesting that you focus on hope. Here's a woman for all the things that she lived through, and yet as a storyteller, you're hooked on that experience, and where that can take you. Do you know anything about what impact that photograph had on the time to the photographer's goals, Horace
I don't
Warner's
think
objectives?
So. At the time, these have only come to light. I forget when they were discovered. Somebody found in a house clearance or whatever the collection, and so then it became more popular once the internet and people started sharing, and there was a book written. So the pictures were sort of kind of hidden away. So they probably served a purpose up to a point, and probably raised a small amount of money through the Quaker mission, but probably more so on the back of Horace Warner's reputation, because he was a fine man. So people would have bought into that sort of philosophy.
And I'll have to think that the photograph of the shoes had an impression on his daughters.
You would hope so. And sometimes they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and sometimes that's it's just that constant reminder. It's just a constant, just at the back of your mind that, if you're moaning about this or you're moaning about that, think about what other people are going through. But I do come back to the hope, and I do repeat that time and time again, because I think it's the key part of the story. It's
Yeah.
what do you do when there's no hope? And that's applicable today to
Yeah.
every level of society. What do you do when you've got no hope? So it's hard to comprehend because we live in such a sort of a lap of luxury in comparison. But how do you sort of quantify? How do you equate to that? Because I've seen the books. I did hours of reading. I bought loads of books, and all the information that's in there is gleaned by. Obviously the documents stand alone, but they're just cold facts. They tell you A, B, C, D. But the depth comes from research and adding all the facts. But how you actually visualize that, and it's very, very difficult, even for me to visualize. And I've read numerous books on the area at the time, but how you can picture yourself in a similar situation, it's yes.
You just put a really important concept to it, and that is, well, several layers in there. One is how the accessibility of media to convey an idea. In the 19th century, it was very difficult to put a photograph even in a newspaper. And finding ways to get the compelling message in a visual media like photography across is something that we just swim in today, but was not very accessible back then, never mind the ability to buy magazines and newspapers to be able to see such media in a form. And then second is how the description of someone can give us a way to hold on to that hook of a story. A hook of a story can happen in words. The famous six-word story, the world's shortest story is 6 words of, baby shoes. But finding a way to convey that in a photograph can be compelling if you have the means to do it,
Yeah.
and the means for it to be viewed. Renaissance art was incredible for the means to communicate an idea visually, but only for those who could see the paintings.
Absolutely. The picture was so far ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And there's another one I looked at as well. It's called the Toffs and the Toughs, where it's a group of Eton and Harrow. If you Google Toffs and Toughs, and I did a lot of research, and I virtually I didn't quite finish that story, so it's still sitting in the background. But it's I think it's 3 Eton or Harrow schoolboys.
Mm-hmm.
And out the cricket gates of Lord's or the Oval, one of the big cricket grounds in London. And there's 3 street urchins at the gates. So 3 on one side of the gate, 3 on the other side of the gates. And again, I can't remember the guy who took the picture, but it was a staged picture, and it's an iconic picture. But when I did the research, the 3 lives of the well-to-do boys was harrowing and disastrous, whereas the 3 urchins made quite a decent life for themselves. So it just shows you that it can be deceptive, the haves and the have-nots.
Right.
But a photograph, it conveys everything. And like you say, the Adelaide picture, similar to the haves and the toughs and that one there. It's it tells its own story almost. And I was so surprised when I started peeling back the layers. It just getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And as I say, it's about turning the corner, and you're looking for a glimmer of hope, some light at the end of the tunnel. But as every door opened, another one slammed in Adelaide's face.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, she just was. It was a constant struggle.
The other thing that you were saying there is that, you have the cold facts, and then you keep finding more and more facts to try to add to that resolution to it. And then you said something else, which is the thing that makes you feel yourself in the place, the empathy. And I think that empathy comes from the empathy of the writer, the experience of the writer, to not just regurgitate the facts, but to contextualize the facts, to analyze and put them together, to see and feel the richness, the warmth, the human being behind the photograph.
Yeah, you have to. When I'm reading a book by any author, I'm in the room. So if it's a good book and the author's telling a good story, I can visualize what the author can visualize. And so I always try and place myself at that moment in time where Adelaide would have been. What did she see? What did she feel? So to try and put yourself in that moment in time, it's not always easy. But that's why there's a few cold drawings and maps in there that show you the location, and they show you where the Miller's Court and where the Jack the Ripper incident sort of took place, just to give you some depth to the feeling of the words, if you like.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I don't know what you mean by, it could never be told in a linear film form, whether in a movie or in a Netflix series or whatever else. I think this is a set of facts from a time in the past that will carry forward for years to come, with lessons that we can be learning from it. And I think we'll have screenwriters watching this saying, So pausing right there, do any of you have questions you want to pose to Paul while we have him? Just go ahead. Come on in. I see you reaching for the mute button.
It's a marvelous story, Paul. And when I was growing up, we thought we were in poverty. I think us kids did, but really we were doing okay when you think about it, compared to this poor little girl. Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. It was I think I go back to my childhood, and we had an outside toilet, and we had a bath in a tin bath by the fire. But you're still indoors, you still got a roof over your head, still got food on the table. So my kids laugh when I tell them stories about having a tin bath in front of the fire, and we only bathed on a Sunday because before school on the Monday and things like that. And even like central heating and that, because my children, that's all they've ever known. But they laugh now when I say, you had to wait for someone to light the fire in the morning. But again, you can't. It's a whole new level, or another level, sorry, for what people of around Adelaide's time would have endured. The cold, the winters, the lack of sanitation. Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
No, you can't even equate it.
No. Not even close. Not even close.
Yeah.
No.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. No, I've said this, in some of my other stories, looking at, people a couple hundred years ago, we couldn't survive that.
No,
we're not built for that anymore.
No, I did. I do. I've got a passion for World War One research, and I've done a lot of military research. And we often sort of sit around the table. And my son is 34 now. I said, "Could you have done this at 16 or 17?" I said, "You can't even do it at 34, but you certainly wouldn't have been able to do it at 16 or 17." Yeah. It's what they endured, and they came back and never even moaned about it once. Never moaned about it.
Yeah.
I think about my in-laws' family who survived World War II in Shanghai, and some of the horrific conditions during World War II in the Sino-Japanese War, and the many people who survived that, who are within speaking distance. They're still alive today. Those memories are still alive today, and those are the memories that are still very hard, very, very hard for people to talk about. And I think that's some of the lift that we do as family storytellers. I see you, Anne, as one familiar with difficult stories of these kinds of things. And the word resilience is the one that comes back to me. And whether it's in the form of hope for a better life or belief in a reason for living, those are subtle differences.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please, Anne.
So I'm, as you know, I'm just getting started on this whole process. And Paul, I want to thank you. You, like my very first Substack post that I did a few weeks ago. My grandmother won a commander of the British Empire during the First World War for the work she did as a civilian in London. And I have lots of information about her career, but not about her as a person. And there is tragedy at the end when she dies, and my mother is left as an orphan at 9. And so, and I'm trying to figure out, how do you take the facts and turn them into a story? Because I think that's what's important. It's not enough. Oh, she won a commander of the British Empire. Oh, cool. It's the putting around to it. And as I said, I'm just getting started, and I'm fascinated by your story there. But I guess, do you have advice for people trying to find that story and the empathy and the
I think it's
roundness of the person?
You've obviously got to do some research, but not research as in genealogical research. You're doing more of a historical and social history context type of research. So you're placing your ancestor at that moment in time. Now, you may not necessarily have some commentary or quotes from her.
Yeah,
But what you're looking for then is someone else who would have visualized and seen the same thing she would have done. So somebody that would have served alongside her, somebody that would have been in her neighborhood, and see if there's any information that you can glean from that. As I say, when I've done military research, not all the records are available online for serving soldiers. But if you find a soldier that served in the same regiment, same battalion, they would have followed the same path and seen, in theory, the similar sorts of things that your ancestor would have seen. So you're looking for someone that you can place in that era at that moment in time that will help you build the story. You know, you've got the facts, which is like your building blocks. So you build your house on your building blocks and your foundations. But when you start hanging the decorations and all the bits and pieces, they're the bits that you pull in from other sources. So you're looking for a comparative story. There may be a book somewhere of somebody that did something similar, because it's quite a significant award that was it your grandmother or great grandmother?
Grandmother.
Yeah, that she received. So you'll look to see if there's similar story. I mean, newspaper archives are fantastic for a source for information. But if you can't place your ancestor directly, then you're looking for somebody else that would have had a similar journey and a similar path, so that you can take that information and build that onto your facts. That's how I kind of work.
That's
Thank you.
tremendous.
Very
I hope
helpful.
that helps. I hope that helps.
Yes.
Hillary, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I found when I first started researching that I was interested in what life was like in the areas where some of my family lived. I had family that lived in the very much close to the docks and that in Southampton, and the area that they lived in, they got a lot of it was slum areas, and it got cleared and that. And somebody had written a book about the dilapidated housing, and it was in the reference library, and I sort of managed to find it. And then you realise what the area was like. You know, there were all these little courts with lots of people lived and had like one toilet or something between them.
Yeah.
And then I've found other things in the newspapers, that family that had 20 odd children and what they lived off of and things like that. That was another branch of my family. So I found that by researching other records, you build a bit more of a picture of how your family might have lived.
And that would suit the book that you found that would have described your ancestor's situation would be something that would be perfect for Anne's story writing, is to find, you'd be lucky to find a book, but you may find references, stories, or even blogs. People may have written blogs about their ancestor that served at a similar time. So the information is just a question of trying to dig and try and build up a picture. And that's what I did with Adelaide. I've probably got more books on East London than anything else at the moment on the shelf, just to give me a bit more context to what life was like, basically.
What a wonderful reminder of the power of the kind of blogging and community that we're doing now, because being able to speak with others or read the work of others that is an approximate time period and shared experiences. And actually now we can just talk to each other too, to compare notes and get inspired and find other resources that go into more detail about clothing or, any of the other subtle things that can provide context and create a mood and experience. You didn't even mention the coal, coal burning for heat in the environment and the smog or air, the London fog creating conditions as well. Tuberculosis and other diseases that were rampant.
I mean, if you consider how she survived all of those, the poor sanitation and all the diseases that were doing the rounds, as I say, 3 siblings died within 1 month from different childhood diseases. So it's
right.
And again, when we're going back
cholera,
to contextualizing what we write, think also about what was going on politically in the country at the time. What was new legislation, government laws, all would have had an impact on the day-to-day life of our ancestors. Not just Adelaide, I'm just generalizing that. That helps build. It's about building a picture, really, and the more information you can get. You may not place your ancestor directly. Say your ancestor was a suffragette, part of the suffragette movement. Now, she may not be mentioned anywhere in the documents, but you know what the suffragette movement was like, what it was about, and there's enough details there. So it's about just placing your ancestor in a similar circumstance to something that's documented, basically.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have questions for Paul? Yeah.
Well, it's amazing. It's just amazing that she lived to be in her 90s, isn't it?
Incredible,
really?
Incredible. Yeah, it's when you think for anyone from that age, even from a semi-privileged background, to get to 93 would have been an achievement. But to get through what she got through and still be spoken about today.
Yeah,
for sure.
We live in such an age where data is generated about everything we do, from opening a door to who drove by on a bicycle in front of our camera. It makes you look back to a time like that and wonder who the other people were with her in that care home. Where had they come from? What were their stories?
What were their stories, exactly?
Yeah.
It's, did she ever tell anyone what her story was? Did she ever share it? Did she keep it buried inside?
You can see the sharing circles, the therapy sessions. Yeah, I don't think so.
I always like to talk to people when in my job when I was before I retired, because particularly the older people all had some kind of story that they could tell you of their life. And you should, and I've always thought you should never think, that person was just an old person, because they were younger and they had a life.
And they've always got the best stories. Absolutely, they've always got the best stories.
Yeah, being just an old person changes when you become old. But
according to my kids, I've been old for a long time.
I'm just starting to accept it. It's been 20 years. Well, gosh, what a wonderful way to end this program. Paul, you've been, as the rest of you may know, we've been chasing Paul for a long time to get him on to Project Kin, and it's an honor to have you here. I now know a pathway to bring you back. And as with all of you, it's as Project Kin, we have lots of different forms of storytelling environments, from our speaker's corner to these kinds of specials, because just making it up. We have Stories 250, and coming in the fall, we'll be doing immigration stories, all ways to reinforce and encourage each other with our stories. It's not just me, it's you encouraging each other. And that has just been such an honor to be here at the time. So we're doing something very special right now. I hope you all can see that. When I was talking about, magazines not being around at the time in the mid 19th century, we're at a particular time in history where so much is happening all at once, and things are happening to make it possible to do things. I see folks like you, Hillary, with lots of stories in her blog that she's had for many years and been writing for many, many years, starting to consider the different ways to help get those stories seen and heard and appreciated in different forms. I'm honored to be here at the time to encourage and support that to happen, because every single one of these stories are lessons that we can all learn from and inspire others to tell their stories, which have a richness all their own, even if the eyeballs to see them are few. It's not about going viral. It's about getting a story told.
There's a quote I use quite regularly. It's actually associated with a military soldier. But a soldier dies twice, once on the battlefield and once when his name is not spoken. So you could apply that to our ancestors. Exactly. So the minute you stop talking about our ancestors, then they're forgotten again. So it's important that we either talk about them, we write about them, or just tell their stories.
And in telling their stories, we are learning from them. We are keeping them alive, keeping their memory alive.
Absolutely.
Keeping what was so important that mattered. That is the hope that it takes it forward. So Adelaide, thank you. Thank you for what you're teaching us now. And,
she'll forever hold a place in my heart. She'll
and now all of
never be forgotten.
Exactly. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I will be capturing all of this into a recording with notes from some of the things that you've been saying here. And all of you who are joining us live, I truly appreciate it and look forward to continuing these conversations.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye now.